Inflation, ladies and gentlemen, is any increase in the economy's supply of currency or money substitute not consisting of an equal increase in the stock of gold or silver money. It can also be an increase in bookkeeping money. In other words, money that does not exist, which is issued or loaned in the form of credit. Many credit cards extend to you buying privileges when actually there is no money to back up those buying privileges. They depend upon you to pay your bill with interest in order to be able to pay the stores from which you purchase your goods. And we'll get into that kind of a system on another program. You see, inflation is not higher prices any more than a brain tumor is a migraine. Those of you who believe that the inflation in the 70s and the early 80s was set off by the increased price of a barrel of oil aren't playing with a full deck of cards. In fact, you don't have any cards in your hand at all. In fact, you belong on a couch in a psychiatrist's office because you're the easiest to lead around by the nose. Price inflation is the symptom of a currency devaluation, just as a migraine is a symptom of a brain tumor. Let's say the total money supply, or in economist talk, the M1. Many of you have been hearing that bandied about on the news and on CNN for years and have never bothered to even find out what it means. Now bear in mind that I'm not talking to all of you. Some of you do know what I'm talking about. But I can assure you, you make up less than 1/100th of 1% of the entire population of this country. Let's say the total money supply is $100, which can purchase 100 gallons of gasoline. Whether it can or can't at this time makes no difference. We're using this as an example. And let's say that this society is made up of 100 people exactly, each with $1. Then, all of a sudden, the government printing press increases or inflates the total supply of currency by 10%, while the supply of gas stays the same. The M1, or total money supply, our currency supply, is $110. So 10% more currency chases the same amount of gasoline. Now remember, folks, the only purpose of a money substitute is to facilitate market transactions. Currency is made to be spent. At least real gold or silver money has true usefulness and doesn't have to be traded, whereas currency is not and never was a useful commodity. So people suddenly have 10% more currency in their wallets, 10% more of something which has no other utility but exchangeability. Are those people just going to store that extra currency and never spend it? Of course not. You know that, don't you? It will be spent in a very unique process. And I might add, very quickly, as all of you out there well know, just by looking at the total amount of your savings compared to the total amount of money you've earned over the years. Right, sheeple? Everybody will rush out and try to exchange their 10% surplus of currency for goods because all of a sudden they think they're rich. They have more than they've ever had before, so they've got to spend it. Because remember, money is not wealth. It purchases wealth. So to feel wealthy, you must be able to have the things that money can buy. Just having the money does not make you feel wealthy, does not give you wealth. And this is why this usually takes place. If you hear a dog barking in the background, that's Sugar Bear performing his patrol duties around the perimeter of the grounds of the studio. No one ever gets over the fence and lives. Let's assume, for simplicity's sake, that gasoline is the only available good. And let's say that John goes to the garage and tries to buy a gallon of gas for the historical price of $1. Brown overhears him and offers $1.04. Well, John counters with $1.08. Brown relents to paying $1.10, a price which John can match but not beat. Obviously, the garage will no longer sell gas at $1 per gallon, since everybody can, and this is the key, and will pay $1.10. Prices are bid upwards just like an auction. If during the so-called energy crisis, when they claimed that there was a great oil shortage around the world, and that was a big, total deception, a lie, a manipulation. If everyone refused to pay the higher prices and just stayed home, there would have been no higher prices, sheeple. None at all. But to make sure that you fell into the deception, they cranked out money on the printing presses and made it available, threw it upon the economy, made credit easy to get, and loaned money to anyone who walked into any lending institution for several years. The consequence was that you're now paying $120,000 for a home that used to cost $25,000 and was originally built and sold for $16,000. Sheeple. Most of you are not people by any means. You are sheeple. And if it makes you angry, that just means the shoe fits you better than anyone else. Whatever the market can and will pay becomes the new price. Now, instead of gas being $1 per gallon, it's $1.10 per gallon. Gasoline didn't go up in value. Currency went down in value. And that's where you all make your mistake. So, well, what's the big deal? I can just hear some of you say, well, what's the big deal? So what? The same 100 people still got their gallon of gas just as before. Practically speaking, nothing changed. This is true only for one reason. Everybody got their inflationary 10% windfall at the same time. In the real world, this never happens because inflation is never some natural random phenomena. Inflation is never accidental, but is always consciously perpetrated. That means intentionally brought about by central bankers who know exactly what they are doing. Now take a look at what you made and what you could buy with what you made in 1970. Take a look at what you make now and what you can buy with what you make. Take a look at the fact that most women were in the home with their children in 1970, and take a look at the fact now that most women are working now simply because they have to, not because they want to, but because inflation took them out of the home, put the children, the occupationally orphaned children, in government-controlled daycare centers where they are learning how to live in the New World Order, while Mommy and Daddy, because of their stupidity, are working their butts off to try to keep a little of what they made in their life. Never mind getting something else to put on top of it. You see, only the government, only the wealthy, only the banks benefit from inflation. Differing weights and differing measures, both of them are abominable to the Lord. Proverbs 20, verse 10. Differing weights and differing measures, both of them are abominable to the Lord. If the government inflates the M1 by 10%, do you for a moment believe that it will simply send 10 cents to all 100 people, much less at the same time? Do you really think that if inflation goes up by 10%, that you're going to get an automatic 10% increase in your paycheck? If you do, you are probably one of those that they released from the mental institutions a few years back. If government did that, it would receive utterly no benefit from inflating the currency supply in the first place. Rather, the government spends that new $10 itself. Now the outcome is quite different. Who must make up what the government spends? Why, you do, of course. You do. The government buys 10 gallons of gas with its $10. Since the people have not received any of this $10, as in the previous example, they still have only $1 and cannot afford to outbid the government. At this point, the situation looks like this. The government has 10 gallons of gas. The garage has 90 gallons of gas, which is the remaining supply, and 100 people have $1 each. You get the message? You see, the sheeple are unaware of the government's currency supply, inflation, and gasoline purchase. Therefore, they do not realize that their total $100 is now chasing only 90 gallons of gasoline. They will soon suspect that something has changed when their $1 will now buy only 0.9 gallons instead of a full gallon. You see, the dollar per gallon ratio has found a new equilibrium or price at $1.11 per gallon. Through this slick process, the government has robbed everybody of 1/10 of a gallon without the use of thugs or burglars. It's so slick that the sheeple rarely, if ever, catch on, and when they do, it takes someone like me to tell them. They never catch on and talk about inflation as if it was like the weather. Know this, dear sheeple, if you control the currency supply, then you control the economy. And it really is that simple. If you want to take a class of people and render them helpless before the elite, a series of inflationary periods can completely destroy a middle class and render them the slaves of the wealthy, of the rich. And that is what is happening. And I don't have to prove that to you. You can prove it to yourself just by looking around. Look back in history a few years and look at yourself now. Look at your bank account. Look at your salary. Look at what you can buy now compared to what it was. And remember that the dollar decreases in value every year. This doesn't stop, you see. Because every time they print a new dollar and don't take a dollar out of circulation, the value of all the money in circulation decreases. Decreases. In a debt economy, new money must be created all the time, or else no one could ever find the money to pay off their debts, and the great theft of this nation would be discovered. Not just this nation, but all the nations of the world that exist upon a debt economy, using fiat or paper counterfeit currency with no backing whatsoever, and debased coinage with little, if any, actual gold or silver content. Take a coin out of your pocket, turn it on its edge, and look at the copper. But you always take it out and you look at it and it looks silver. So you sheeple buy it. You buy the deception. Because if it looks like it's silver, it's okay. If they had just minted copper coins, you would have been upset, you stupid fools. But since it looks like it's silver, you didn't get upset, did you? Made no difference to you. If it looks like silver, it must be silver. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. The whole point of an honest, stable gold money supply is to ensure that relative scarcity, demand, and production efficiency of goods and services are accurately represented through their actual market prices. Prices, ladies and gentlemen, are information. Any type of elastic currency renders such accurate, honest pricing impossible. Government benefits most from inflation because it gets to spend the newly printed currency first and buy at yesterday's prices. Now, obviously, if a society had only one tangible good, then there would be no need for money or currency. In our example, the garage also has $10 for the 10 gallons sold to the government. What could the garage do with the $10? Buy gasoline from itself? No, folks. The garage would need somebody else with whom to trade its $10. Therefore, a society must have many different goods and services available. You see, in actual practice, that $10 would be spent mostly on wages, directly and indirectly, as wages are, as you know, the principal cost of everything. And who gets wages? Why, people get wages. When government spends its out-of-thin-air currency, it finds its way into the hands of people who trade it with others. But here's the important thing. Some people get the currency first or earlier, and others get it later or last, like a game of musical chairs. It's the slow guy who's left standing. The inflationary process is not as abrupt, but it does work the same way. A modern economy is very complex, and its participants are all very intricately related. When the government spends magico presto currency, it takes about 18 months to filter through the economy. It goes from top to bottom in a very, very slow spiraling fashion, losing value, or what's called purchasing power, along the way. Dr. Ron Paul wrote in the Ron Paul Money Book, quote, "Whoever gets the new money first benefits the most, but the favored industry becomes dependent on new injections of government credit and therefore forms a powerful special interest lobby to argue its viewpoint in Washington. Thus does inflation encourage the breakdown of society into warring factions." The more the government inflates and spends, the greater the pressure from the top and the greater its velocity through the economy. In effect, 1923 Weimar Germany, regardless, dear listeners, of the rate of inflation, inflation is still theft, and the inflation that's taken place in this country alone accounts for the greatest heist, the greatest theft, the greatest robbery that has ever taken place in the history of the world. And you still don't even know you've been robbed, or how, or who did it. Again, from the Ron Paul Money Book, Dr. Ron Paul said, quote, "Inflation destroys the incentive to save, especially when there are government ceilings on interest, as with savings accounts. Our tax system, taxing illusionary income, our illegal tax system worsens this, and we can expect to see a smaller amount saved by Americans. In fact, if statistics are true, Americans save less than any other people in the world at this time. Inflation steals from those who still believe in thrift and robs pensions and retirement funds. The only way you can benefit from inflation is to spend your money quickly, first, before anyone else gets stuck with it. While the prices are beginning to rise, not afterwards. If you save your money during an inflationary period, you lose it all. You lose. Yet most Americans still think that that's the thing to do. When prices are rising, we know we're not going to be able to afford to buy anything pretty soon, so we're going to save our money. Besides, inflationists don't have the dignity or courage to rob us face to face. They must hide in Washington, D.C. and trick the common wage earner through fancy statistics and verbiage. John Maynard Keynes, and he would know, said this, quote, "By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. As the inflation proceeds and the real value of the currency fluctuates wildly from month to month, all permanent relationships between debtors and creditors, which form the ultimate foundation of a free market or capitalism, become so utterly disordered as to become meaningless, and the process of wealth-getting degenerates into a gamble and a lottery. Lenin was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction and does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Are you learning something, sheeple? If you're an inflationary government, and what government isn't, because all governments tend to collect power and take power and control away from the people and hoard it for themselves until they absolutely reach the ultimate pinnacle where they are the owners of the people. Then the trick is to maintain control of the addiction and not let it overwhelm the economy. You see, if they just let inflation run rampant, it would lead very quickly to revolution. So they control it, and they just steal your wealth and your sustenance and your assets, little by little, until pretty soon the people have nothing with which to oppose the wealthy. And their children can never attend the same schools and thus can never challenge the ruling elite. You realize that you are a non-producing parasite if you are the government and are careful not to kill off your generous, unaware host. You bite gently and withdraw modestly, or else the dog will wise up to you and start scratching. However, governments have never been historically completely smart. Those in government are greedy power seekers by definition, and the situation is like hiring speed freaks to run the pharmacy. Or to paraphrase Lord Acton, quote, drugs addict and absolute drugs addict absolutely, unquote. Substitute drugs with power, which is a drug. However, once those in government get a taste of the inflation drug, addiction is assured. William E. Simon, in A Time for Action, said this, quote, inflation works like a drug, requiring bigger doses to achieve the desired effect as the system adjusts to it. A little bit of inflation, like a little bit of an addictive drug, is impossible. Our inflation record over the past 20 years shows this effect clearly. From 1960 through 1964, the average rate was 1.5%. From 1964 to 1969, it was 3.5%. Notice the dividing line. It was the Kennedy assassination. From 1970 to 1974, 5.8%. And from 1975 to 1979, 7.1%. And from 1980 to 82, we have been well into the double-digit regions, compounding on top of what has gone before, unquote. Congress has indebted us to trillions. Trillions. Everybody hails Ronald Reagan as the great communicator, the great president. More money was spent by government during the Reagan administration than during the entire history of the United States of America put together. Put together. Ronald Reagan laid the groundwork to bring the bankruptcy of the nation closer to you in reality than you ever dreamed could happen. You see, the Reagan administration and Congress enjoyed the tune, but we are ordered to pay the piper, and can we afford the bill? Of course not. The money was created out of thin air and never existed to begin with, and we have to pay back the interest on top of that, which was never, ever created either. You see, they just cranked out fiat counterfeit Federal Reserve notes, or didn't even print any notes at all, just made it available in the form of credit. You see, when they do that, they just make a bookkeeping entry, create it out of thin air, write a check, and give it to the person who borrowed the money. Electronic funds are transferred, and nobody ever sees, feels, smells, touches, or hears the crisp crinkle of a real dollar bill. Don't go away. I'll be right back after this very short pause.